and on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
This House is in session. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, September 12th, 2023, and Friday, September 22nd, 2023 to be confirmed. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be confirmed.
The questions that the aforementioned minutes be confirmed. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby confirmed. Minutes of the meeting held on Tuesday, October 17th, 2023 to be deferred. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the aforesaid minutes be deferred.
The question is that the aforementioned minutes be deferred. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned minutes are hereby deferred.
Papers.
Mr. Speaker, I'm commanded to lay the non-reimbursement investment financing agreement number GRT/ER-19884-BA, digital transformation of the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. The amenitary agreement number 2 of loan contract number 4920/OC-BA, Public Sector Modernization Program, PSMP. The Barbados Economic and Social Report 2019, the Barbados Economic and Social Report 2020, and the Barbados Economic and Social Report 2021.
Government notices.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice of the Debt, Natural Disaster and Pandemic Deferment of Payment Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2023.
Private members' notices, notices of questions, reports from select committees, first readings of bills.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the first reading of the Debt, Natural Disaster and Pandemic Deferment of Payment Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2023.
Questions that the aforementioned bill be read the first time. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it.
Statements by ministers, congratulatory and/or obituary speeches, personal explanations, motions for leave of absence, oral replies to questions, notices of motions for the adjournment of the House on matters of urgent public importance, orders of the day.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Orders 6, 16, 18, 20, 42 subsection 5, 43, and 44 for the remainder of the day's sitting.
The questions that the aforementioned standing orders be suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. The aforementioned standing orders are hereby suspended for the remainder of the day's sitting.
Government business, sir.
Government Business is the order of the day.
Order number 9. In the name of the Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Affairs, to move the second reading of the Debt, Natural Disaster and Pandemic Deferment of Payment Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2023.
Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As usual, sir, I rise at this time of year to bid you, sir, a wonderful day and week.
Honorable member, you are adorned most appropriately.
Absolutely, sir. And I take this opportunity to say to all Barbadians that the pride with which we want to ensure that our country, sir, works with, that we are committed, sir, as Comorians, to setting the standards very high, sir, and to say to all and sundry that this week is for everybody. And everybody is welcome, sir. Everybody is welcome, and as the Honourable Member for St. Philip West has indicated, we too are committed to seeing a transformation of our education system, because I believe, sir, that all Barbadians should have the same pride that we do this week. And I genuinely mean that, sir, because how we feel about ourselves determines what we do in our life. And I think that certainly the university with which we have attended, sir, sets the standard extremely, extremely high. Having said that, sir, up and on. Having said that, the bill before the chamber today, sir, is, for all intents and purposes, sir, a relatively straightforward bill before this chamber. But I'm going to take the opportunity, sir, just to update the chamber, and certainly, sir, in relation to the country, in relation to why we believe that the Brave Strong initiative, sir, has been so important, and the efforts that the Honourable Prime Minister and the Ministry of Finance, sir, we've been leading internationally with support of others, sir, to usher in the reforms within the context of the international financial architecture. But as Barbados, that we are literally, sir, walking the walk as well as talking the talk in relation to how we manage our own affairs, sir, as it relates to reforms. Now, sir, the country will recall that when we came to office in 2018, sir, we had to undertake an extraordinary set of reforms, including, sir, restructuring our debt in order to put the fiscal situation in the country, sir, on a much more sustainable footing. When we did that restructuring, sir, both on the domestic as well as on the external side, we included at that time, sir, in all of the restructured debt, what was then referred to as the natural disaster clause, which allowed, sir, for certainty in the event that the country was struck by a significant natural disaster that clearly would have created disruption within the context of the government and certainly the country. And therefore, these natural disaster clauses, sir, were intended to give the holders of that debt the certainty that the pause which would be triggered because of said event, sir, earthquake, a major hurricane, sir, that will cause damage to the country, that over a 2-year period that there will be the cessation of debt service, sir, to allow the country to use the resources that would ordinarily be used to pay down debt, to use those resources to rebuild. That is the concept, sir, around what we refer to as natural disaster clauses, to allow countries to be able to plan its way out of what clearly, sir, would be an extraordinary set of circumstances. Now, it is important to appreciate, sir, that in the aftermath of a disaster, when you're trying to respond to the very basic needs of persons, you're trying to provide security, sir, you're trying to provide food, the last thing that people need to be worrying about is whether or not debt, sir, will be paid. Because you would appreciate, sir, that in those circumstances, countries would typically take the decision, but you know what? You can gotta hold on because I gotta deal with these people first. And so we took the perspective that to be proactive and to signal to market participants to have faith in government's instruments, that this clause, predetermined, would allow creditors, meaning those persons who are lending money to government, to know that there's a structure within which they would be repaid, because the government, in order to accelerate and make sure that any relief that needs to be delivered, that those resources, in addition to any other resources, sir, that would ordinarily be made available, would be used to reconstruct and to rebuild and to bring maximum relief, sir, back to the population. And that was the genesis, sir, of what we did with our domestic debt restructuring in October of 2018, sir, when we came to this chamber and we did the original debt holders bill, sir, with respect to the restructuring, to be able to put those the natural disaster clause in our newly issued instruments. A year later or so, sir, when we reached agreement on the external creditor side, came to this parliament, sir, we did a similar exercise, and we included the natural disaster clauses in the external debt that was reissued in 2019 to be able to provide a similar certainty within which to operate in the event of a natural disaster. Now, sir, back then, the world was very different. Nobody necessarily contemplated that a pandemic was literally, sir, around the corner. Contracts mean. And therefore, having used the definition of a natural disaster in relation to physical disaster, sir, when the pandemic hit and airplanes stopped flying, sir, that was perhaps the most natural disaster that could happen to the planet. But it was not within the definition of the natural disaster clauses that we had put into our debt. And in spite of the fact that the economy, sir, was significantly impacted because of the pandemic, it meant that we could not trigger those clauses to use those resources, sir, that was intended post-disaster to be able to deal with the fallout of the impact of the pandemic. So we recognized then that clearly, through no fault of anybody's, because obviously we had the part of the reason that we had included the natural disaster clauses in the first place was because over the course of 2014, 15, 16, and 17, sir, we had seen across the Caribbean an increase in not just the frequency, but the intensity of the storm, sir, that had impacted Antigua, sir, St. Kitts, Bahamas, and others, and the devastating impact that it had on those economies. And therefore, we said we needed to have a very clear articulation in relation to settled policy, settled law, in relation to how you treat to debt service, and therefore the cessation for a 2-year period of all debt service, sir, would allow, as I said, the government to use those resources to finance any recovery effort, and that 2-year pause, sir, will be pretty much tacked on at the back end of the loan. So if you were impacted by a disaster today, sir, and you had 10 years left on the repayments for a specific loan, sir, then that would mean that for the next 2 years, you would not pay the debt service, but it would mean that that 2-year service of debt would then be tacked on at the end, thereby extending the repayment period by an additional 2 years, whilst the interest, whilst not capped, will be capitalized to be able to take account for the fact that no principal was paid within the 2-year period, and therefore interest accrued as normal. But you give absolute certainty, sir, with respect to your creditors in relation to that. Now, I make that point, sir, because as you know, coming out of the same said debt restructuring, sir, which all told took about 18, 19 months to complete between the domestic and the foreign credit. We had completed a number of critical reforms, sir, We had met at the end of March 2019, sir, you recall, we had met the 3.5 primary surplus target. By the end of March of 2020, we had met the 6% primary surplus target as the original BERT program had called for with respect to debt reduction and putting the public finances back on a sustainable track. Such that when we had completed the restructuring on the external side, sir, Barbados did not see the traditional approach by the market in relation to the sell-off that would normally be occasioned when you issued the new instruments, because we had demonstrated, or in part, because we had demonstrated that we were committed to owning the reforms that we identified, sir, as part of the mission critical agenda, of which, sir, there were several, and I will take an opportunity a little later to explain again why this sewage matter, sir, is important, but I'll take that, I'll speak to that a little later. But we addressed the mission critical agenda. We fixed a number of the critical issues that were confronting Barbadians, sir, in relatively quick time. And because of that, sir, that commitment of this Barbados Labour Party, sir, to showing the population, sir, and indeed the rest of the world, what governance looks like, sir, what governance looks like, even in extraordinary circumstances where at that point we thought we had seen it all in relation to the crises that would confront Barbados. And therefore we adopted that mission critical agenda, we executed that mission critical agenda, and because of that commitment on the part of the government, when we issued the restructured debt, sir, the holders of that new debt, with the natural disaster clauses already included in it, decided that they were going to hold on to that piece of paper, sir, which, unlike other countries, when you restructure, typically, sir, as soon as you issue a new piece of a new security, they're looking for somebody, sir, to sell it off to cheaply in order to get back the money quickly. We did not see that, sir. And I believe that the reason that we did not see that is because of the leadership that this government executed on behalf of the people to be able to put Barbados's fiscal management and the management of the public finances, sir, back on a much more credible path, allowing us, sir, to respond to the needs of the people. I raised that and I made that point, sir, because we were anticipating at the time that when we do the debt restructuring and people will want to sell off, sir, the debt cheaply at maybe 75 cents, 80 cents on the dollar, sir, to be able to get back their money as quickly as possible. It was our contemplation then, sir, ahead of the pandemic, remind you, it was our contemplation then that we would do a buyback, sir, in order to use those resources to deal with some marine spatial planning works and stuff that I know the Honourable Member for St. Michael South at the time, when he was the Minister of Maritime Affairs and Blue Economy, was counting on to be able to accelerate the works within the marine environment that we had committed, sir, to doing. Now, sir, our debt, that debt, from January of 2020, sir, all the way through the pandemic, sir, all the way through to early 2022, that debt traded at either 100 cents or 101, sir, at times, sometimes 99, sir, but pretty much, sir, for that entire 2-year period, Barbados' debt traded at par or at times at a premium, which is contrary, sir, to the performance of any newly issued debt that normally would go into the market. And therefore, it made it difficult for us to be able to execute the debt for nature swap as we had originally intended. And therefore, we had to find a different way, sir, with which to come up with a structure to do the debt swap. Now, I raise that particularly because, sir, when we were able to work with the IDB and the Nature Conservancy, sir, in the middle of the pandemic, sir, to be able to agree the structure for how we would free up these resources, which would ordinarily go to paying interest over the course of the newly issued debt, how we're going to use those debt savings to then spend on marine conservation efforts right here in Barbados. We came up with a structure, sir, which, as you recall, last September, I came to this honorable chamber and we passed the resolution that gave authority for the government to execute the debt for nature swap, given that, as you know, sir, once debt is on the books, sir, Parliament and the government has to pay said debt. It is the priority in terms of ranking on government's expenditure. But because we would no longer be paying the debt to the original holder of the debt, but we would be diverting that debt to the Barbados Environmental Sustainability Fund, we clearly had to come and indicate where this was going, because somebody will take up the books at some point later and see that the interest is no longer quantified in the way that it was ordinarily, and want to know where the money gone. But the money, sir, has been diverted, and there's nothing secret, sir, diverted to the Barbados Environmental Sustainability Fund as part of the deal that we did with the Inter-American Development and the Nature Conservancy to execute the debt for nature swap last year, which allows us to be able to divert about $50 million US, sir, in savings between the interest rate that was originally on the debt with what the new debt would pay, and allow us, the government, to use the money that we would have paid originally to deal with these environmental sustainability issues in relation to the maritime space. Now, that new instrument, sir, that we issued to execute that specific transaction included the natural disaster clause, sir, but it also included the pandemic clause. And it is important that the country appreciate that the process through which we arrived at this was to take stock of not just the fact that our newly issued debt had included natural disaster clauses, but because we were in the midst of a pandemic, we felt it was important to also include a pandemic clause as the reason why a country like Barbados would be able to suspend its debt service for 2 years. So in addition to whether it's an earthquake, sir, a hurricane, significant natural disaster, landslides, or something of that nature, sir, including now a pandemic, that this will form the basis for which such an extraordinary impact would happen to your economy, that this would be the basis for which the debt service also could be suspended in order to allow the country to be able to use these resources. Now, sir, that was September of 2022. And that new instrument, the Blue Loan, as it is called, sir, in the market, the Blue Loan, has both, as I said, the natural disaster clauses as well as the pandemic clauses included. Now, you would recall, sir, that earlier this year, I came to this chamber because as we restarted the domestic capital markets, as we said that we will do, because the 4-year grace period that we had on the original debt restructuring, sir, came to an end at September of 2022. And for the avoidance of any doubt, sir, The original program the original program contemplated that we would have a grace period on principal, meaning we did not pay any principal on debt for 4 years between October 1st, 2018 and September 30th of 2022. And that the interest only was paid within that particular period of time. So we restarted the domestic capital market, sir, because as you would appreciate, sir, having not issued debt really, with the exception of the original boss bonds in the middle of the pandemic, having not, and that really was a private placement, technically speaking, given that that was directly focused on public servants. So it wasn't really a debt issuance of sorts in the traditional sense. But having restarted the domestic market, we came earlier this year with respect to the boss bonds to be able to include those clauses in the debt. Now, just bear in mind, sir, that as normal service resumes, sir, with respect to government issuing debt in the traditional sense, it meant reviewing the existing legislation, and rather than having to come and do haphazard amendments along the way, we agreed, sir, that in principle, that we would amend the current legislation relating to the issuance of debt in order to make sure that we are covered in the way that we should be, and therefore it is important. That is why this particular piece of legislation is before the chamber today. I refer specifically, sir, to the External Loans Act, Cap 94D, the Local Loans Act, Cap 98, sir, the Special Loans Act, Cap 105, and the Guarantee of Loans Companies Act, Cap 96. Now, sir, the passage of this piece of legislation today will make consequential amendments to those 4 pieces of legislation that I just referenced. And we're doing it this way, sir, because, as I said, as we move forward as a country, we are sending a very clear signal that Barbados' leadership with respect to how the international financial architecture is done. We are not just advocating for things, sir. We are actually doing what we said that we will do. And this just is a part of how we show to the world that we are serious about these things. Now, I made mention earlier, sir, of the Bridgetown Initiative, and I think it's important for the country to understand and recognize that our participation in leading and shaping how international reforms can make a difference, sir, to the lives of ordinary Barbadians, sir, whether in Waterhall Land or Wharton, sir, because with the events happening, how things happen over the weekend, sir, with respect to the excess rainfall and flooding and everything that would portend, sir, that the potential for disruption, sir, and as you are a small state, we are vulnerable. So there's no way to evacuate to in Barbados, you know, sir. Like how in the US, there's a federal government, people get to evacuate upstate, outer state, wherever, sir, with ease. The reality is, sir, that there's no way to evacuate to in Barbados. And therefore, our vulnerabilities as small states are peculiar. And if we don't present ourselves to make the arguments that are in our best interest, sir, then you and I, sir, will be doing our constituents a disservice if we do not represent their interests, not just here in Parliament, sir, but as we engage constructively to bring reforms internationally that are shaped, sir, with Barbadians in mind and small states like Barbados in mind. And therefore, the Bridgetown Initiative, as we developed last year, sir, has gained traction after long efforts really in speaking individually with respect to the multilateral development banks, the various donors and shareholders of these institutions, in order to give a perspective that if we are going to respond to the climate crisis, then we have to do things differently in relation to how we address certain things. And I'm going to take the time just to outline a few of those things because, as you know, sir, we had to restructure the debt because it was choking us. Choking us, sir. And if you spend most of the money that you collect paying debt, sir, it means that simple things like garbage collection, simple things like getting water to people, sir, simple things like just getting a bus for people to ride on, sir, simple things become almost impossible. And therefore, even the notion of debt sustainability, sir, we have been advocating needs to be clearly relooked, because if you're building resilience, sir, you can't build resilience on 7-year money. It's not a commercial enterprise, sir. You can't build schools and hospitals, sir, with the same terms and conditions, sir, as if you're building an airport or port or some commercial enterprise, sir. And therefore, as governments have to contemplate how we finance development, sir, that has to be taken into consideration in relation to not just the length of the instrument that you borrow, sir, because with the best will in the world, sir, if we had every piece of money, sir, to build everything that we had to do, sir, one time, then there wouldn't need for the banks or credit unions, sir. We'd be able to go and just do what we got to do as individuals, but we don't. And therefore, as a country, if we're going to develop and keep building capacity, sir, then we have to pay attention to how we finance our development. And as a small state, understanding the nature of that and the vulnerability, and I want to communicate that vulnerability does not necessarily equate to risk in the way that people may ordinarily assume. It just means, sir, that you must be able to carve out the appropriate policy space that allows governments like ours the ability to be able to respond to its people simply because you're able to develop a financing structure that allows government to do the long-term work that needs to be done without compromising, sir, our ability to enhance the lives of people. And therefore, it has been our very strong argument, which is now seeing a lot of come to Jesus moments, sir, happening globally, which we are grateful for. Not fast enough in some instances, but we are seeing things taking a turn, I think, for the better of us in the region, and therefore we must be committed to seeing it through in order to make sure that we get for our citizens, sir, what we know is really in their best interest. So the Bridgetown Initiative specifically, sir, asks for, as part of the international reform of financial institutions, the adoption of what is referred to as climate resilient debt clauses, all right? CRDC, which is the same thing as our natural disaster clause, which is here in outline in this bill. And we've seen the IDB, the World Bank, and others adopting these clauses. Now, one of the things that we have criticized them for in adopting the clauses is that they say that it's only for new debt. Now, just bear in mind, sir, that if you're going to bring relief to people, especially with what we are seeing globally, then you have to give people the relief. No, you can't say, I'm going to give you relief in the future when you borrow from me. If a disaster happens today, you need the relief today. You don't say, oh, I can lend you some money to get out of the disaster, and then it doesn't make sense. So we have been strongly advocating as part of our international civic responsibility in trying to effect these reforms, to say to all parties, look, we got to go back to the drawing board, because it doesn't make sense saying you're going to include it in in future debt, when you're seeing around the world, sir, whether it's the floods in Pakistan, sir, the floods in Libya, we just had the earthquake in Marrakesh, sir, where the annual meetings were held. All around the world, sir, vulnerable countries are being impacted. You had the severe droughts right across Africa, sir, in relation to the impact on the economies and the like, sir. And the reality is that building resilience is going to take some time and effort, and therefore we believe that they need to go and look at that again. But let me make this very simple point, sir, because I want Barbadians to appreciate that whilst we are including these clauses here to give certainty to creditors around should an event happen, whether you will be paid, the government of Barbados, and we've made this point in all the forward that we've been in, sir, that none of us, sir, actually want to experience the natural disaster, to get debt relief. Because the horror, the disruption, the instability that is often occasioned, sir, by natural disasters is something beyond anything that money could fix, or the potential for money to fix. We actually want to build a resilience so that when the natural disaster happens, the disruption is as minimal as possible so that you can continue. So whilst we are happy that countries and institutions are adopting what is now referred to as the climate resilient debt clauses to provide for the 2-year suspension of debt service, we would actually like to see, sir, that once countries have adopted a climate action plan, and as you know, sir, as part of the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, which is provided by the International Monetary Fund, we have been working with all of the stakeholders, meaning the multilateral development bank, sir, to see how they can help scale up the resources that are being unlocked under the RST to help Barbados finance its response to the climate. It is all, again, sir, part of the whole debt sustainability analysis which needs to be done because, as you know, sir, when we started this journey, our debt target was 60% by 2033. When I stood over there, sir, and did the debate from that side. The pandemic came, sir, and through the discussions with the fund, we agreed that it no longer made sense for the debt target to remain at 60% of GDP by 2033 after you've gone through a pandemic that took literally 2.5 years stuffing out the reserve. And therefore, you needed to make the adjustment to be able to ensure that the program remains credible and actually capable of delivery, and therefore we adjusted the debt target to 60% by 2035. Now, since then, sir, as you know, the war start, cost of living have gone up. And incidentally, sir, as I mentioned earlier, it is only when the war started last year, sir, in February, that we saw our external debt being traded. It went down as low as 89 or 90, sir, at some point, and then subsequently come back up because the war created uncertainty globally. Interest rates started to rise globally, sir, and therefore we saw the debt being traded at below par for the first time, sir, since we reissued, for the first time for that length of time, since we issued the new debt. And therefore, you must appreciate, sir, that liability management as part of how government is able to unlock resources is going to be a critical part of how governments are able to build resilience. And therefore, we have been advocating that the establishment of a climate action plan is something that we would love for all the multilateral banks to be able to support, because Barbados has one climate policy, sir, and in order for us to execute on that climate policy, it will require multilateral development banks working together. It will mean bilateral institutions who are acting on behalf of governments coming to the table and helping countries like Barbados finance that climate action plan. And as part of that climate action plan, sir, we believe that part of the solution really is to trigger these natural disaster clauses or climate resilient clauses. Trigger it proactively, sir, to build resilience, not necessarily post-disaster, because the disasters will come. And it's premised simply, sir, on the fact that when you have to rebuild after disaster, sir, it's more expensive. It's more expensive than if you build the resilience, sir, up front. And we are really, sir, in a race against time. Because this summer, sir, as all of us have clearly understood, sir, the sun is hotter than when we were children, sir. And it ain't easy out there. The farmers, sir, the farmers having a hard time, sir. Barbados is self-sufficient in chicken, sir. And you know, sir, heat and raising chickens is not an easy combination, sir. Not an easy combination. So this climate crisis is more than just about weather systems, sir, and the like. We Bajans, sir, like chicken bad. And if our self-sufficiency, sir, in chicken is impacted because outside getting a little too hot, sir, then you understand that this is multifaceted, and therefore we must find the appropriate solutions, sir, in order to ensure that, one, whatever comes our way, sir, that we have the capacity as a country to be able to respond and to find the right solutions in order to get ourselves through. And this is not, sir, an easy exercise, but we are committed as government, sir, to working with all of the stakeholders to be able to unlock whatever interventions we need to unlock from a financial side, sir, to find the right instruments that will allow a chicken farmer, sir, in Checker Hall, sir, to be able to have built-in resilience with respect to his farm practices, because if we are not able to feed ourselves, sir, because outside too hot and the chickens, sir, unfortunately, you know, heat stroke, sir, is a real thing. I know that for us as human beings, we run for the fans, we turn on the AC, sir, and we try to cool ourselves down. But with the best will in the world, sir, with the will in the world, these things mean increased costs to farmers, sir, for the cooling and these types of things. And therefore, we must be conscious, sir, that we're not just fighting an esoteric climate crisis, sir. This thing has real live impact on ordinary people across the country. It has impact on us as the government, sir, because as we try to give as much relief as we possibly can, the different strands with respect to these matters, sir, are important to understand. And therefore, we continue to advocate that we must not just unlock the ability for government to do the large infrastructure projects to finance our way through this climate crisis, but we have to find the right solutions as well, sir, for the economic agents right across the economy, sir, to help them, which means, sir, mobilizing private resources to be able to help build some of that resilience as part of the process. Now, the truth is, sir, as I said, we would love to be able to address the renewable energy issues in the country. And as I said to this Parliament earlier this year or something last year, that the renewable energy transition, sir, and how we build resilience is going to be important, sir, for how this country is able to build any type of resilience. Because in 2022, sir, last year, we spent an extra $400 million importing fuel, sir, compared to 2019. And in fact, sir, that means that money just gone, you know. Just gone. But part of the challenge for the country is that getting access to the resources to execute is becoming an issue. Because the orders, sir, simply too small, whether it's for batteries, sir, whether it's for the panels, the production issues that we were having globally. And one of the areas that we've been advocating as well, sir, as part of the Bridgestone Initiative, is to ensure that small countries who need or who develop their climate action plan, that we need special and differential treatment, and I'm looking at the member for St. James South, because this is a matter that we've been arguing for since the WTO has been formed, that small states, sir, need special access in order to help us build this resilience. So we must use the trade system, sir, to allow countries who are climate vulnerable to be able to build that resilience, because, sir, as we're working out the mechanics to get the financing in place, which we're working to do, sir, and just this morning before Parliament started, sir, took a presentation on where we're going with the climate action plan and the financing plan for it. Big agenda, sir, big agenda, $5 billion US investment by 2035, sir, required really to build a resilient Barbados. Part of that, sir, because of our limited debt space, we have to find creative ways in order to be able to get that done. And we believe the government will be able to do about a third of that, given the capital investment that we've said in BERT program that we will do over the next 5 to 10 years, of about $500 million per year on average, sir, on average, in public investment. We want to double the private sector investment from about $500 million a year to $1 billion a year in order to ensure that we can get there. Now, but as government is doing that, sir, it means we must unlock the resources for the private sector to equally, sir, build that resilience, and in order to ensure that when, I say when, sir, and I knock on my desk, sir, but when the natural disaster strikes, sir, the country must be in a position, sir, to get up and dust off itself quickly and get back to normal. And therefore, this is not just an esoteric discussion here about debt service, because I would rather, sir, take the money in an agreed framework and say these are the 5, 6, or 7 projects from a national perspective that are a priority, with everybody supporting that, and we say we're going to build resilience over the next 3 to 5 years in these specific areas in order to avoid the disruptions, sir, that we all know, and we see it play out on the TVs almost daily now. That if we can do that and stay committed to that, sir, that we can ensure that whenever the natural disaster strikes, that we would have built sufficient resilience, sir, that the disruption would be minimal. And if we can, as a country, can achieve that, sir, in collaboration with our international partners, working together with Barbadians, with the credit unions, individuals, and the like, sir, with a singular purpose, sir, of building resilience in this country. A singular purpose, sir, of trying to enfranchise ordinary Barbadians to participate, because we're the best bill in the world, sir, the money say no in the bank. The money say no in the bank, sir. And people, because of the government's limited space, we have not been able to issue the types of instruments that will be required to the market, and we're restarting that now. But the government has limited space, which is why we established the Blue-Green Bank, sir, in collaboration with the Green Climate Fund and support from CAF, sir, to capitalize it, in order to unlock some of that private capital in the banking system, sir, in the credit union system, to help do some of the said climate mitigation efforts, which is why investments in the home ownership, providing energy program, sir, is so important. And therefore, the Blue-Green Bank is intended to be able to unlock some of that. And they want that when it's up and running, sir, that it also helps to deal with some of the resilience on some of our farms, sir, to help bring additional revenues into the farming community as part of building resilience. The ability for the farm, sir, to be able to use the biomass and the like, sir, to be able to generate electricity and natural gas, sir, is going to be important as part of how we integrate this process. So therefore, it is not just a discussion about the Ministry of Finance and the government doing this big fancy thing, sir. We want to be able to get ordinary people involved and understanding that if you can lower the cost of doing business, you lower the cost of energy, sir, it increases literally the profitability of these firms. It takes investment, sir, but it means that if I'm a farmer, sir, I gotta open up my books because I don't have the capital as a farmer to do these investments. And therefore I have to take on whether it's equity or debt to be able to get stuff done. People would want to know, sir, that you have good farm practices, you're keeping your books properly, sir, in order to ensure that this capital that's sitting there in our financial system, sir, can be properly deployed. And I feel, sir, that as we take these extraordinary steps as government to say this is the framework upon which people will be repaid in the event that in the future we are significantly impacted by a natural disaster, or, God forbid, sir, there's another pandemic of something that causes the airplanes to stop flying again, sir, or some extraordinary similar event, sir, that our capacity as an economy to be able to respond, that I hope that we are in a position to build as much resilience upfront that allows us not to have to rely too heavily on debt relief when it will cost more, sir, to be able to build the resilience that we know that we want to be able to do in the interim. Now, sir, the Bridgetown initiative, sir, calls for a number of other critical things in terms of mobilizing private sector investment, 1.5 trillion per year for green and just transformation. And I made the point in relation to the Blue-Green Bank being set up right here in Barbados, sir, to help unlock a lot of this private finance, because it is important to understand that people to appreciate that. I know that people are accustomed, when the last government was in office, sir, then you would Treasury bill rate, sir, as I told you, had reached 7.25%, sir. Imagine that at 3 months, sir, Treasury bill. 3 month Treasury bill, 91 days, sir. 7.25%. That's a lot of money, sir. But you know why? We had 20-something downgrades, sir. And each time you had a downgrade, sir, it meant your credit quality. People doubted whether you can repay. So if you can get 7.25%, you remember when we were younger, sir. When we were younger, and you were good and when you used to open bank accounts and the interest rate was 7 and 8%. And that was annual interest, sir. But imagine that your government had reached a point where people were only prepared to lend you money for 90 days, sir, if you give them 7.25%. So you couldn't spend the money on anything else, sir. Because in 90 days, sir, you had to come up with the goods to pay back people. 90 days. So mobilizing capital here now in the context of how we adopt and approach this idea of climate finance is going to be important for people to appreciate. Building resilience, there's a return on investment, but it can be short-term in a way that people appreciate. And rather than have the money, sir, sit down in the banks and they charge you and everybody quarreling about the fees, sir, and all of that, we have to put this money to good use, sir, building resilience across the country. So when we speak about $1.5 trillion in private investment, sir, we got money sitting down here in our banking system that we now need to work collaboratively. And I want people to listen to me. This is not the government coming for anybody's money in the bank. This is providing instruments within the context of the private sector to help solve some of the very problems in the private sector to help build resilience for the country. So all the government wants to be able to do, sir, is facilitate the mobilization of that private capital to be able to respond and build resilience across the economy, which would help us, sir, to be able to close the financing gap in relation to building a climate resilient Barbados by 2035, because that's the only way, sir, that we're going to be able to get with the space that we will create on the public side, we know that we have a target of 4.5% to 5% growth over the medium term. In order to get that, it means we must front load as much of the investment as possible, and therefore we're working to unlock as much of that private investment as possible. And let me say, sir, private investment includes, for the avoidance of any doubt, sir, either my constituents who want to build a house, sir, under the program or yours, that is private investment, sir, because when they go and they select lot 30 at lot 30, sir, wherever they choose to go, they go to the financial institution and they borrow the money, sir, and they unlock that investment. And the government, working through the program, just does the infrastructure work in order to ensure that we can unlock that investment. I know that that's what the Honourable Member for St. George South is working so hard to be able to get done, because once we get the lands developed, sir, people can then start choosing where they want to live and therefore unlocking that private investment. So we're not talking about only big investments in the way that people think when you refer to private investment. So in that way, sir, we get to deal with the provision of climate resilient homes for Barbadians. And just bear in mind, sir, that these climate resilient homes have been designed to be able to withstand Category 3 hurricanes. And therefore, as you can see, based on our geography, sir, that we've tried to engineer for the fact that you never know when the storm is going to strengthen, sir, or how quickly it will strengthen. But for the most part, sir, they will tend to be 1 to 2 by the time they pass. So by engineering to 3, it gives us a little bit of wiggle room, so to speak, sir. But of course, anything can happen at any particular point in time, but we've designed it to those homes to Category 3 in order to ensure that they can withstand that, and therefore gives the population, especially those persons, especially, sir, low-income persons who are most vulnerable. And I know the Honourable Member for St. Michael South and St. Thomas can attest that the provision of homes for persons who were impacted by ELSA continues to be a challenge for the country, and therefore you need to ensure that the homes that we are building, properly designed, they're costed, sir, to be as cost efficient as possible, whilst still meeting the standards of Category 3, such that Barbadians must recognize that if you can take up your money, sir, and build a home, you can't just take out your money, sir, and build anything. Because this is your personal investment now, sir. Your personal investment. And when I talk about unlocking private investment, I want Barbadians to appreciate that I'm talking about you, sir, your constituents, my constituents, all of us, sir, that you need to spend wisely. Because as the government is trying to make sure that we spend the taxpayers' dollars wisely, sir, with respect to the bigger infrastructural projects, that individuals as well, sir, need to think before they go and spend the money and make sure that whoever gonna do the work, sir, that they know what they're doing. Because that too is important. So the mobilization of private capital, sir, is important. And I say that in the context of building resilience, because these natural disaster clauses, sir, are not the only solution to financing the climate crisis. And I make it clear, sir, we are grateful that more and more persons are adopting them, but we want to see a proactive approach to be able to trigger these clauses in the context of a climate action plan supported by all the stakeholders, which I believe, sir, makes better use of the clause before the event rather than after. And I think that if we can do that, sir, we can jumpstart not just the building of resilience, sir, but obviously naturally has an impact on the way the economy will turn out. But then also the relation to the Sustainable Development Goals, sir, being off track, which everybody agrees globally, they're off track. It provides an opportunity as well, sir, for us to get a few things back on track globally if we're able to come up with a coherent approach with respect to how we use these clauses. Now, the truth is, sir, that there are many facets to the brainstorming, but I just want to raise those specific issues this morning, because people may hear these terms being bandied about, but it really does, when the rubber hits the road, sir, it means different things to different people. I just want to take the opportunity to highlight that ordinary Barbadians have a role to play in how we achieve resilience, sir, for this country. And therefore, I know that within the context of what's happening, cost of living going up, sir, people trying to get goods from different markets, sir, things are happening to keep, and the pressure's on. But how we spend, sir, and what we do will make a difference. And therefore, as we try to make the changes and to get things going, we literally, sir, have to throw out some of them bad habits that we are accustomed to that we want to hold on to. And in every space, we must ask ourselves, why are we still doing things the way we were doing them 25 or 30 years ago, sir? The world has changed. We have to also change with respect to that, and therefore that means, I know the work that the Honourable Member for St. James South has been doing with the financial literacy, and that work is equally going to be important, because I accept that, as I said, people are accustomed to just going to buy a government bond and getting a decent rate of return, and the money is sitting down there. And don't get me wrong, sir, buy the bonds. Buy the bonds. As you know, sir, the first set of boss bonds will start maturing next July. And that time has gone so quickly, sir, that people don't even realize that thing. And you've gotten your interest, sir. You know, every year, January and July, the interests are paid. And those set of boss bonds will start to mature from July of next year. And therefore, people must trust, I feel, in the record of the government, such that in reopening the capital markets again, that the track record of government, I think, is a strong one with respect to being able to unlock that type of investment. But as we put more, I said the government creates the framework for private investment within this so-called climate space to evolve, sir, to be mobilized, that I hope that Barbadians will take the opportunity, sir, not to listen to people on social media, sir, talking. Talking. Yes. Please, we have to remain focused, sir. And if we allow ourselves to be distracted by noise, then we will not build the resilience that I know that Barbadians are capable of achieving. And I know things are tough from the perspective that they are being bombarded, sir, daily by a lot of bad news. Daily, globally. If you live in this world today and you spend too much time on social media, sir, I swear to God your mental health might be shot. But you must find a way, sir, to cut through all of that and say, come what may, Barbados, we got to handle our business. And in handling our business, sir, whatever comes our way, we must remain absolutely focused and ensure that we stay the course, as the Honourable Prime Minister said a few years ago. We have to stay the course. Because, as I said, there's no way to evacuate us, sir. There's nobody coming to save Barbados. And therefore, if we keep allowing ourselves to be distracted and not be absolutely focused, then I would not want to say what may befall Barbados. And as I speak to that now, sir, I want to take the opportunity just to raise a couple matters, because, you know, we have been, as a government, in office now for just over 5 years. And in that 5 years, sir, I don't know if they've got anything in the kitchen sink anymore, but everything has been thrown at this government and this country, sir, over the last 5 years, and we are still here. We are standing. And Barbados' name, sir, today actually means something globally, unlike what we found 5 years ago. And that's a fact, sir. That's a fact. Yeah? No, that was not achieved because we were talking, sir. We were doing. We were doing. And one of the things that I saw circulating on social media, and I saw a reference in today's paper to it, but I want to raise it here, sir. This government, as I said at the very beginning, sir, we took on a very, very important mission-critical agenda. When the sewage, sir, was flowing in the streets of Barbados for 3 years, when we came to office, sir, 3 years. Very serious mission-critical agenda. And we got that matter settled, sir, not necessarily in the most elegant way, but we got the matter settled nevertheless. And we have been searching, sir, for 5 years for a permanent solution to the South Coast sewage plant. A permanent solution. And as you would appreciate, sir, that in between there you had COVID, sir, and a whole set of things that happened that caused us not to be able to find the right type of financing to be able to deal with it. So whilst I was in Marrakesh, sir, responding to in a panel discussion in relation to how the government of Barbados is using liability management, sir. Liability management, meaning, sir, we would repurpose existing debt to be able to solve some of the critical problems that are facing this country. Because if you ain't got enough fiscal space, sir, meaning that the last government, in doing what they were doing, sir, the impact is still being felt today, you know, sir. And people forget. They forget quickly, or at least those who claim, who are speaking today, seems to have forgotten that sewage was flowing in the streets on Barbados for about the better part of 3 years. And it took this government coming to office, very focused and very determined that we were going to solve this problem. And we have created a temporary solution, but we recognize that we need a permanent solution. Now, for the avoidance of any doubt, sir, of any doubt, and anybody that read today's newspaper or anybody, you don't even need to read the newspaper, sir. In all of our homes in Barbados, sir, all of our homes, and for the avoidance of any doubt, sir, the last time I checked, sir, Barbados, with the exception of the Scotland district, is made of limestone, sir. And the Scotland district is 1/7, if my memory serves me correctly, of the landmass of Barbados, sir. So for the majority of this country, sir, all of us, for most of us, as I said, we have a pit toilet, a well, sir, a well that sewage goes into, sir. Our wastewater, sir, goes into the well, sir, at our homes. So when we flush our toilets, we take a bath, sir, everything goes into that well, sir. And if you think of the limestone, sir, as a strainer, if you like, sir, when we flush our toilets, we wash our hands, we take a bath, sir, everything goes into the well, and it percolates, sir, and finds its way through the limestone, sir, into the aquifers. That happens in every single house in Barbados today. Unless you're hooked up to some fancy sewage system, as I understand, happens at Coverley. But almost every household and every business, depending on your location, so if you're on the South Coast, you're hooked up to the sewage system, but for the rest of Barbados, the wastewater from our properties percolate through the limestone, sir, and as you would understand, sir, it acts as a filter, a strainer. And the water goes into the aquifer, sir, which is then treated by the water authority, sir. A very serious process. So when people are walking about saying that the government wants to put sugar honey iced tea water, sir, into the aquifers. It is sad, because it means you don't even understand how ordinary people in this country, sir, live in when the day come. And it really does put, in my mind, an attempt to discredit the Water Authority and the good work that the Barbados Water Authority has been doing for years, sir. Because the Honourable Member for St. Michael East is a warrior, if you know the Honourable Member for St. Michael East. And we have been discussing issues in relation to the nitrate levels in Zone 1 and all of these things for a number of years because, as you know, sir, different parts of the island, the water table is higher than the next. So therefore, if you understand, sir, how filtration and percolation works, depending on the height of the water table, the concentration of your wastewater, sir, depending on the depth of the limestone, how much it goes through, will determine how much is removed in that natural process and the concentration levels that it goes through into the aquifers. But it doesn't matter because the Barbados Water Authority, sir, every single day extracts water from the aquifers in Barbados, sir, treats that water that flows through our pipes. So if you want, sir, to understand that this country, very water scarce country, sir, and every day we are discharging 3, 4, 5 million gallons of water, sir, out to sea. And we just went through, sir, 4 months of water restrictions in this country. The first time in my lifetime, sir, that I knew that we had to endure such a long time of water restrictions. If there was another period, I would love for members to educate me. But in my memory, we have never had water restrictions for so long. And I make that simple point, sir, because people need to understand that if you do not manage, sir, and make decisions for the long-term sustainable development of this country, sir, then we will be doing our people, sir, a disservice. And I hope that, sir, the Barbados Water Authority will do the appropriate infomercials, but don't rely on me saying it because people might say, but the government doing this and I think I want the Water Authority to do the infomercials, to explain to Barbadians exactly what happens when you flush your toilet, sir, when you take a shower, when you wash your hand at the kitchen sink, sir, where that water goes, and then how it is treated when it comes back into your same pipe for you to do what you have to do. So when people are inferring, sir, that the government want to take up sugar honey, iced tea water, sir, and put it in the aquifers, I want them to understand, sir, that it defies logic, common sense, or anything that they're proposing. Now let me clarify, sir. The plant that we intend to build at the South Coast is a tertiary treatment plant, sir. Tertiary treatment. And the tertiary treatment means, sir, you're treating it to potable water standards. Now, I am no expert, sir, in water. I'm not a hydrologist, but potable water tells me, sir, that's the water that's used when it comes through your pipe. Now, we agreed a certain framework that would allow, when we passed the water reuse bill earlier this year, we agreed on standards with respect to how water will be treated in this country, sir, which is already being done in certain areas and limited to irrigation and a few things. But part of what we are contemplating now, sir, is a debt for climate swap, which will see us facilitate the construction of the upgrade of that plant without the government having to spend an extra cent. But it's to do a couple of things. It's not just the financing. That's why I say, sir, that regrettably, because people only see one element of something and they try to sensationalize it, sir, and people run off with it. Few things, sir. This government has invested heavily in trying to get access to water for farmers, sir, to deal with food security. All right? We agreed that as part of the 3 or 4 million gallons of water that could be recovered every day, that we use some of it, sir, to replenish the aquifers, some of it, sir, to go to agricultural purposes, because if you want food and nutrition security in the country, farmers need access to water. And that is something that we've committed to doing, and we will execute. Thirdly, sir, you would recall the issues of the discharge of this said sewage, sir, in the Graham Hall swamp that caused issues related to biodiversity and the way the swamp was being managed. The swamp is not necessarily fully back to where it was prior to when the last government dumped the sewage in there indiscriminately, allowed it to go in there indiscriminately. And that is part of what we will see some benefits with respect to the upgrade of the plant, in order to allow us to be able to say that we are making every effort to restore not just the mangroves, but the biodiversity, everything that's there, in a reasonable and sustainable way with respect to how we manage those very fragile resources in that ecosystem that's there. Fourthly, sir, whilst the discharge out to sea has been going on now for the better part of at least 20 years, sir, by being able to treat the water to potable standards, sir, and reuse it, it would mean that the marine area, sir, will be enhanced over time, because we will no longer be pumping sewage out to sea in the way that we have been doing. And therefore, this is not even so much a financial transaction. It makes sense financially, but this is going to solve multiple problems, sir. And therefore, I will ask Barbadians, and as I said, I will on the issue with respect to the Water Authority, just put the infomercials out to explain to Barbadians exactly what happens today. Because when people make these statements, they try to do it in a way that trying to make the government feel as if we're doing something extraordinary, when we are indeed not, sir. It is consistent with what happens today in almost every household across this country, and it just requires the appropriate people who have all of the technical knowledge. And there's a gentleman, sir, that comes. I last saw him here at Parliament, and I've told him on more than one occasion that he's perhaps the most important person in Barbados. I didn't ask to call his name, but he's the water specialist. Not Mwanza. Sorry, with your permission, sir. Mr. Eiffel, who deals with the actual testing of the water at the reservoirs to make sure that the treatment is of the standard that people expect. Every time I see him, I tell him, sir, you are the most important person in Barbados, because the process of taking the water from the aquifer, sir, because as you know, sir, when the rain falls and it ends up in the gullies, it carries all kinds of stuff with it. It takes fertilizer from the farms with it, sir. It takes all kinds of stuff with it and dumps it into the aquifers. And they extract that water and clean it, sir. Every day they do that, test it to make sure that the water that leaves the reservoirs meet the standards for us to consume. And therefore, this is nothing to trifle with, sir. This is serious business. And therefore, I would like those people to do the appropriate infomercials, because these are Bajans, you know, that working every day to make sure that whenever we turn on our pipes, sir, that we know that the water that is there is usable. Now, I know people will say, you know, they got brown water and you got all these other things. They're fixing the pipes in order to deal with that. But the reality is that if you take clean water and you run it through a nasty pipe, then the water can be nasty. But the water that's going in is hence. So I'm just making the point, sir, that you have Barbadians working every day in our interest to make sure that the water that we consume, sir, is of a very high standard. And therefore, it defies me, sir, that people would attempt to use what is a completely natural process now with the limestone. Given that we had 4 months of drought this year, sir, and let me tell you something, sir, I was in a meeting with the Minister of Finance from Djibouti, sir. And the Minister of Finance from Djibouti said that the rain had not fallen for 4 years, sir. 4 years. Now, I can't even contemplate. We had a little stretch here recently when the rain did fall for a few weeks and it felt like forever. But you can imagine, sir, Barbados in a situation where you had rain for that kind of time, sir. And part of the reason that we had those 4-month restrictions this year is because we had a dry spell, sir, a serious dry spell. So this is not, sir, something that people should play with. I take it very seriously, sir, and I urge the Water Authority, you go into overdrive, because people must know that they've got Barbadians out there every day, sir, getting up out of bed, and their sole job, sir, is to make sure that the water that leaves those the reservoirs after treatment, sir, and I feel offended that people will attempt, sir, to even suggest that those people are not taking their jobs seriously. Mr. Speaker, the contemplated debt swap, as I outlined, sir, more details will come at the later time in terms of who we're working with to be able to get it done. But I am absolutely confident, sir, that how we use our debt, sir, responsibly, will help bring relief to Barbadians, will help build resilience in this country, sir. Whilst there's not a perfect solution with respect to being able to have one comprehensive solution to everything that is being proposed, and we would love to see it happen faster, I think it's important that the country understands that this is not just some financial ingenuity being dreamed up in the Ministry of Finance, sir, because we feel like doing something fancy. The ultimate objective here, sir, is to build resilience for this country. And in building resilience, that's going to mean different things to different people, different parts of the country. And therefore, we must absolutely remain focused on the mission ahead, sir, the mission. And my job, until determined otherwise, is to make sure that we can facilitate as much of the mobilization of private capital as possible to be able to advance what government is doing as well, in collaboration with government, under whatever framework that we may want to agree, because this country, sir, if we are going to achieve resilience, is going to require substantive investment, and people need to be able to be in a position to understand that the process through which we are going to the process through which we're going to integrate and have this carefully managed climate action plan is part of what this government had indicated in relation to our Roosteries initiative, that everything, sir, in this country is connected. And because of that connectivity, sir, because of that connectivity, it is important to understand, for people to appreciate that when we talk about Roosteries, it's not just a buzzword, sir, with respect to a thematic program or some esoteric discussion, sir. It is how Bajans live every day. How we live every day, sir, impacts the quality of the water that we drink, sir, to the extent that it impacts the quality of the water that's actually in the aquifers. So when we dump motor oil in the gullies, or we go and dump whatever it is we want to dump in the gully, sir, that impacts the water that we will potentially have to treat in order to be used for potable water. When there's discharge of garbage or something in the marine environment, sir, it affects the coral reefs, affects the fish. Everything that we do, sir, has an impact on everything that we do in this little rock here, sir. We don't have any rivers. Well, there's Joe's River, but we don't have any rivers, sir. We don't have any rivers. We don't have any rivers to speak of, sir. We don't have any significant streams that people can have access to water. And therefore, it is important that as we develop our climate action plan, that the integrated nature of everything that we do, sir, when the day comes. So between the mechanics that confusing people in the neighborhood, sir, between, you name it, sir, everything on this little rock. Because we made out of limestone, sir, everything can percolate, sir, and go down through the ground and end up in the aquifers. And it is that water that the Water Authority, sir, extracts that then makes it, and they will be able to tell you, sir, what the difficulty that they have to go through to get that done. But I am absolutely confident, sir, in the work that the Barbados Water Authority has been doing in that respect. We're trying to get the pipes replaced, sir, so that you don't get that brown water coming through. And it's not the brown water, it's the rust in the pipe, you know, sir, that is the residue that causes the thing to be impure. So therefore, the replacement, the mains replacement, is a critical part of it. And therefore, we want to be able to find a way to be able to get that finance in addition to the renewable energy with respect to allowing the Water Authority to use renewable energy rather than the electricity costs that is associated with pumping water. So we're dealing with that too, sir. And therefore, it is not an exeteric exercise, sir, on a small island that has to depend on that we are vulnerable, but that vulnerability starts at home, and I hope that people are able to appreciate that, because this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach in relation to this. Now, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, this bill will amend those four pieces of legislation to include these natural disaster and pandemic clauses that will defer the payment of debt for 2 years in the event that there's a significant natural disaster that triggers the policy from CRIF. I have to get I'm awaiting the preliminary report, sir, from CRIF to determine whether or not we will get a payout for the amount of rain that fell in Barbados over the weekend. Based on what I saw, certainly in my own constituency and across Barbados, I don't see how we do not, and that will help go a long way for helping to bring some measure of relief, at least from a government finance perspective, to be able to look at that. But as I said, sir, it's the External Loans Act, the Local Loans Act, Special Loans Act, as well as the Guarantee of Loans Companies Act in relation to this bill in terms of the consequential amendments that will be had in relation to the inclusion of this. So going forward, any debt that is issued under those acts will automatically have these clauses in the contracts, therefore allowing creditors to know that this is the framework within which it is being done. One thing I should mention, sir, before I wrap up, is conclude, sorry. You will notice, sir, that there was not the inclusion of treasury bills in the suite of legislation. And for good reason, sir, because as you would appreciate, sir, treasury bills are short-term instruments, 90 days, 91 or 182 days, usually referred to as 90 or 180 days in maturity. They're intended to be a financing mechanism for government to be able to help with cash flow. So you would appreciate, sir, that if you issue a 90-day instrument and something happened, that it would already have been programmed into your replenishment, if you like, sir, into your cash flow to be able to settle. And therefore, it would be impractical to delay repayment of a treasury bill issuance, however small, as it usually would be, for 2 years on the basis of that. And therefore, we agreed that from a policy perspective, that given that treasury bill issuances are relatively small by their nature, then that would not necessarily have a material impact in relation to the operations. But I want to make it clear, sir, that government's short-term financing needs are separate and distinct, sir, from the long-term financing of government. And if you're talking about building resilience, as I said, sir, the balance now between the raising of capital on the short-term side, meaning treasury bills as we reopen the capital markets, and we want to rebuild a yield curve because we haven't issued anything for 4.5 years or so, really, to speak of. It's going to be important that we balance and understand that as government puts instruments back into the market, that we're able to understand that what prevailed under the last government, both with respect to ministers of government swimming in sewage, as well as the quality of the credit, sir, that is not the reality of this government. And therefore, as we have taken very seriously the management of our public finances, when we reissue instruments in the space, the kind of rates that the last government were being asked to pay, that is not our reality. And therefore, we remain committed, sir, to be fiscally disciplined. And as we are responsible with respect to responsible stewards of the public purse, that this bill today, I know, similar to what we did in 2018 and 2019 when we restructured the debt, that the same confidence, sir, that the creditors at that time, having seen what had happened in the previous administration, recognized that this government had a very clear plan that it was executing with respect to bringing respectability and some level of pride, sir, back to the management of the country's affairs. And I believe that in 5 years, sir, that we have been able to do that and more in the face of some quite extraordinary challenges. So this bill, sir, was focused narrowly on the potential for disruption and how we will solve what would be a disruptive event in our events with respect to what happens in the normal course of life in Barbados. We are confident, sir, that our history with respect to the public policy that we've executed under the BERT program, the first iteration of the BERT program, and the second iteration as we recalibrated after COVID, that this bill is consistent with our very strong advocacy for the uptake of the climate resilient debt clauses. This now includes not only natural disaster, but also pandemic clauses, sir. So it would mean that we're the only country in the world, sir, where all of our debt, except for treasury operations, which is short term, that all of our debt would include these clauses, because it is important for us to appreciate that if a disaster happens in the way that it did with COVID and the others, that the government has a specific responsibility to try to mitigate against the social impact. Creditors will not be disadvantaged because all of our debt right now, sir, unlike before, all of our debt is amortizing, which means, sir, that we don't wait until the end to pay off the principal. We give people back a piece of the principal either every quarter or every 6 months. So therefore, there's a recognition that our ability to be able to manage our not just cash flow situation, but our ability to manage how the debt is repaid has changed considerably, and therefore, because of the nature of the fact that our bonds are amortizing, sir, meaning that we pay a piece of principal every quarter or every 6 months, depending on the nature and the structure of the instrument, then that gives confidence to the creditors that even with a pause, that you've already recovered some of the principle, and therefore, as part of the confidence that they have in us to be able to do more is a very strong record, and we have been able to do that consistently, sir. Certainly in the last year, as we've started back repaying the principal part after the grace period ended, and long may that remain so. But I want to stress, sir, that whilst these clauses are important for certainty to the creditor, we really do want, in the context of what is being crafted internationally, that countries can focus and use whatever resources we have available to us to build resilience rather than having to build in a post-disaster environment, because the type of disruption and social instability that naturally accompanies natural disasters make it much more difficult for countries to be able to recover. So the building of resilience up front, sir, remains the government's priority, and that is where we will continue to push and advocate very strongly internationally to be able to get done, so that within the context of an agreement for the implementation of the country's climate policy, that we can collaborate rather than seeing multilaterals competing with each other to be able to help Barbados, and I dare say, sir, the rest of the region, be able to help build some resilience, sir, which is absolutely important. And so, sir, I am happy to lead this debate this morning, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to share just a few thoughts tangentially related to what government's overall policy is in relation to liability management. At the appropriate opportunity, sir, I will come back to the Parliament as always, because as I said at the very beginning, anytime you are making a change to, I suppose, the terms and conditions in relation to what is settled debt payments, we will come here, sir, and we will do the appropriate resolution to give effect to that. But liability management, as well as working with other multilaterals to scale up the resources that we have access to under the Resilience and Sustainability Trust, is going to be important, sir, to helping the country build that resilience and to help us mobilize the private capital that is required to be able to close the financing gaps as identified in the Climate Action Plan. And so, sir, with those very few words, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time. I'm obliged to you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sir, I rise to share some thoughts as people of St. Michael South Central have empowered me to do on this very important piece of legislation. Now, sir, I think that people of Barbados, including myself, thankfully, do not have as much experience with the reality of a post-disaster environment as much of our sisters and brothers in the world have. I recall, sir, that, and it's interesting that today is UN Day, and when I was working with that organization, one of the things that it fell to me and my team to do was to be able to respond in post-disaster scenarios, to be able to go into some of the countries in the region for which we were responsible at that time, countries of the Eastern Caribbean, to carry out something that was called either a damage and loss assessment or what was called at the time a post-disaster needs assessment. And the point of that was to be able to gather information, to gather data, to understand what the country would need in order to recover. A post-disaster situation, sir, real post-hurricane scenario, post-earthquake scenario, as those of us who were on the ground after the unfortunate circumstances in Haiti some years ago, since which there have been others, is one that is extremely chaotic. And, you know, we talk about the fact that Barbados had not had, before Elsa, a hurricane for over half a century. And even the last hurricane that we experienced, being as it was barely Category 1, perhaps did not give us, and we're glad that it didn't, because that is perhaps the kind of experience we don't want to be able to boast about having. But certainly, if we have any relation, as we do, as we must as part of CARICOM, to our sisters and brothers in Grenada, in Jamaica, in the Bahamas, in Dominica, we understand and we hopefully begin to appreciate that on the ground post-disaster, things can, as my godchildren would say, get very dread. You have issues of safety and security. You have issues of water availability. You have issues of having to provide emergency and critical medicines for people. I say all that to say, sir, that when a disaster hits and has passed, the work now begins. And there are so many concerns to address. A country, a government, the people who are trusted and empowered to take care of a population, to respond post-disaster, needs to have the space to make certain decisions. That is what this legislation is about. You know, we heard from the member who led that this is a series of consequential amendments. We see references to deferral of payment and the fact that lenders have to be notified about deferral of payment. All of those things are true. That is the technical manifestation of what must happen. But the point of it, the reality of it, the purpose of it, is to make sure that in that chaos, in that period when there may be no power, when there may be no water, when there may be no connection to the outside world, when there may be no ability to get new imports in through the port or by air, that in those critical moments and days, that a government, a minister of finance, a minister responsible for disaster, is able to say, look, we know that we have money that we can spend on securing our population that we do not have to then spend on repaying debt. In the chaos that follows a disaster, a country is not able to send delegations to the IMF and to other members of the international community to argue for relief. In the moments that follow a natural disaster, a country needs to have the wherewithal and the space to be able to understand what are the critical decisions that it has to make. A couple years ago, one of the things that we argued for in international conversations was this idea of predictable liquidity. A government needs to know how much money it will have at its disposal after a hurricane, after an earthquake, after whatever disaster, to be able to respond. As a part of those discussions at that time, sir, there was this notion that humanitarian assistance would suffice. And it came up in the context of the loss and damage discussions that just broke down internationally. But this notion that we could equate loss and damage response to humanitarian assistance. And I said to colleagues, including those who were representing the US at the time, in that room, that humanitarian assistance cannot get all of my utilities back up. Humanitarian assistance is meant to get food and medicine and water and safety to a population. Humanitarian assistance cannot make sure that I have a 48-hour turnaround time to get internet connectivity back, to get light back, to get water back. It cannot make sure that I have essential services up and running to service my population or to have business continuity to get small businesses back up and running. Humanitarian assistance does not do that. But further to the point, if the event is sufficiently large to affect more than one country, if it is sufficiently large to affect a region, well, I am competing with several people for humanitarian assistance, and I am the smallest one. So rather than have to go, because Barbados in those circumstances is a mosquito, and other countries are a gorilla. And while we know that mosquitoes are small but deadly, or can be, they don't make as much noise as a gorilla running through the jungle would. And so the whole question of a country like Barbados having to pick up its cap and take it in hand to an international community after a disaster, well, chances are we can't even get out the country to go and ask for money. The idea is that predictable liquidity is part of resilience. By that I mean, knowing how much money you have to spend to get your people safe, to get your country back up and running, is key to responding in a disaster. It is the point of what we're doing. And being able to say that we do not have to service, to make principal repayments on debt or to make interest payments on debt in the 2 years following disaster means that we know how much money we can spend on making sure the country is safe. It is that simple, it is that practical. That is what it is for. Now, the member for Christchurch Central talked about what triggers these natural disaster clauses and these pandemic clauses. And one of the things that I noted in reviewing the consequential amendments necessitated by this bill is that it would have to be that the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, what we call CRIF, that that policy covers a disaster such as the one for which the natural disaster clauses are relevant, which means that there has to be some benchmark that says when are these clauses triggered. And as the member said, that is important because just like we need predictability, the lenders do as well. And if we don't have some predictability in when can we say that these clauses should be triggered, it would mean that lenders don't feel as if they have safety or security at the time that they are lending. And so that's why that's one of the things that is important. I do believe that the role and the role of CRIF in putting the region in a place to be able to respond responsibly to disaster, the role of parametric insurance, which is what CRIF provides, is one that can be strengthened. And I do recall there were some conversations started some time ago because really parametric insurance, and I want people to understand because there are people who will say, well, we are covered by CRIF. Parametric insurance really is, I don't even want to say a drop in the bucket. It really cannot even begin to cover the scale of repair and restructuring and rebuilding that is needed after a disaster. Many countries like Barbados have, like Barbados, a single main hospital. If your single main hospital is lost in a hurricane, a parametric insurance payout of $3 million certainly is not going to do it. And so while there's a role for that kind of insurance, these kinds of clauses are necessary so that the money that would have been paid, had been directed to servicing debt, can now be used to keep people safe and fed and productive again. But the Honourable Member for Christchurch Central made reference to some things that I think are very important. And that is, one of those has to do with the issue of when these clauses are triggered and whether we don't need to have this predictable liquidity in order to build resilience in the first place. I think that goes to a part of the conversation that is happening now in the area of loss and damage. And those who are paying attention might notice that the international discussions on loss and damage have broken down. And what are those discussions? Simply, it is that countries who have suffered for decades, for centuries, from the emission of greenhouse gases, of which the US is actually the highest emitter, are saying that we have historic damage. Y'all are talking about today, but we have historic damage and we have historic debt from dealing with that damage. And really, there should be some payment that is made from industrialized countries who have gotten rich off fossil fuel-based industries to countries that have arguably gotten poor from the effects of fossil fuel industries. There should be some finance flowing from one to the other. And the conversations that are taking place right now globally are what should that look like? There's a lot of mistrust in that conversation because countries like ours, not just the Caribbean, the Pacific Islands, and some others, are saying that we don't necessarily trust certain developed countries to be able to make those decisions, and we want more transparency in that. And I say these things because I want us all to appreciate that these conversations that we have ultimately affect what happens with us and to us here on the ground in Barbados. But I also think that the loss and damage discussion has another part of it that we have perhaps not been discussing, and that's this issue of slow onset events, different kinds of events apart from a hurricane. I remember some years ago, we actually went to do a damage and loss assessment, not following a hurricane, not following anything that had been categorized as a storm, because there were no high winds associated with it, but it was a pure rainfall event. The rain poured for days and days and days in a particular country, and there were huge losses associated with that. Things like beach erosion arguably should perhaps be considered disastrous in the sense that they cause a country to lose a lot of its assets and a lot of its potential productive capacity. And so I think that part of the conversation that this government must continue to have, if it has not started already, is how do we define a disaster? Is a disaster only something that can be measured according to wind speed, that can be measured according to the scale that has categories from 1 to 5, and I'm told that even category 5 is ill-defined and there's nothing past category 5 on the books, although we know that there are things past category 5 that happen to countries and to people. What is a disaster? And arguably some of the physical deterioration of our countries, of our coastline, of our hillsides, if it applies in your country, could be categorized as a different kind of disastrous event for which resources are required. But sir, there's something else that is very critical to this conversation. And I heard the Honourable Member make reference to a climate action plan. And I hope that, I'm sure, that at some point the contents of that plan will be made known to us all. I gather that it may have some association with roofs to reefs, and to that being operationalized. I gather from what has been suggested that the climate action plan is roofs to reefs made live and practical in the lives of Barbadian people. And so I think it's very important to be able to see what that looks like. Because the fact is that there are so many things that have to act together and work together in order for this kind of policy to be made real in people's lives. I was watching a documentary the other day about how the government of Singapore is actually targeting longevity in its policy and planning. And the official from the government who was being interviewed said something that sounds very simple, but I have not forgotten. She said the civil service of Singapore believes that one simple thing, that policy is implementation, and implementation is policy. Policy is implementation, and implementation is policy. What that simply means is that nothing that you write down on a piece of paper or approve in cabinet or pass in parliament is real for people until it is done. And similarly, the way that it is done is what is going to affect your record on policy. So with that in mind, I think the conversation now has to look at what does a resilient Barbados really look like? I'm assuming that that's what's contained in the Climate Action Plan. How many hours are we targeting for each utility to be back up and running following a disaster? How many hours are we targeting for roads to be cleared, assuming there are fallen branches and trees and so on, after a disaster? How long to get back connectivity to the rest of the outside world? How long for businesses to be able to be up and running again and people to go back to work and children to go back to school? Those are the measurable things that we are talking about when we talk about surviving a disaster. Because once you have made sure that your medical emergencies are met, that people who are sick or injured are receiving treatment, and people have water to be able to live well and safely and healthily, then these are the kinds of things that you're targeting. What are those metrics? What are those things? And who are the people who are charged with coming together to make sure that we agree on what those all look like? But there's something else. I was talking to a friend the other day about the fact that when we were growing up, our parents, I grew up in a, as we would say, a board house. And every now and then, one of the boards you would notice was starting to look a little funny. It was rotten, or it was starting to, it needed to be replaced. And that approach of replacing board by board, replacing piece of galvanized by piece of galvanized, was an approach that our parents were able to take or took, because they prioritized those things in having a home and raising a family. But they were also able to do it because they financially would be able to set aside via a meeting turn or via some other, again, predictable finance. They would be able to say, well, I know that by November, I can be looking at replacing one or two of the boards. Sir, I think that one of the most telling things, certainly for me as a member of Parliament, and I'm sure I would hope that it was the case for others in terms of capacity to observe what's really happening on the ground, was that many of the homes that were damaged following Elsa were already in very poor condition. And in fact, when we started the conversation about the issue of retrofitting of roofs to be able to be hurricane resilient, one of the things that we realized was that, in fact, a lot of the homes could not carry a new roof because the weight of a new roof, doctors will tell you that they will not operate on a patient that is very ill or that is advanced in years, too advanced in years, because sometimes the patient will not survive the surgery. Some of the homes cannot survive the surgery. And so there was some thing that has evolved where somehow Barbadians are finding themselves less capable of doing the incremental repairs and the incremental changes to their homes that would mean that they would be able to withstand a stronger wind or severe rain. We had spoken for some time about the idea of revolving funds to allow people to retrofit homes. The idea of revolving funds to allow people to be able to install the apparatus for rainwater harvesting so that at the level of the household, we are able to have some sustainability and predictability in our use of and access to water at the household level, so that the water that falls from the sky, by rainwater harvesting, I mean the water that falls from the sky at the time it falls, we have some catchment device for it at the level of the household, and we're able to use it at the level of the household. And we talked about being able to have a revolving fund for that purpose. So, policies, remember, policy is implementation and implementation is policy. Policies like this one can only work well alongside other kinds of policies. I know that the Green Bank is meant to attract financing that is supposed to address roof replacement and so on. But I think that we fool ourselves if we think that a government of this size, with a budget of this size, can provide all of the housing and lands solutions that are required. We cannot. What we must be able to do is to give households and individuals the wherewithal to be able to do what our parents did, which is when something needs fixing, there is a set of money. It is, and I ain't talking about big money because it didn't cost my parents a lot to replace 1 or 2 boards, but there are resources available either at the level of the credit union or some other financial institution that means that people can, the private investment that the member for Christchurch East Central was talking about, people can make these fixes themselves. If we allow homes, private dwellings, to deteriorate over time, we will not be able to find the capital to fix them all in the event of a disaster. If we allow people, generations of people, to be dispossessed from land, and I know that sounds like a strong word, but when I say dispossessed, what I mean is you are in a house and your grandmother died and left the house for you, but you don't have the papers, and you don't have a way to show that you own the land or that you own the house. You are insecure. That dwelling is insecure because at any point something could happen and you could be called to prove that you own it, but you cannot. These are the kinds of things that have to go alongside or have to be part of a real resilience plan. How do we make sure that Barbadians are able to, one, prioritize, because that's a part of it as well. We ourselves have to prioritize making sure our dwellings are safe. But one, prioritize repairs. Two, have some kind of financial facility available to be able to, on their own, build their houses up to a resilient level, be able to, on their own, do the kinds of retrofitting that will mean that they can harvest rainwater, that they can use water in the home, and therefore have a reliable and predictable water supply that does not necessarily depend on the common utility. What are we doing to be able to ensure or to promote the issue of security of tenure of land and homes? All of these are the things that have to be a part of any climate action plan, and making sure that those members of the private sector who have this responsibility are also in a position to respond. Now, you know, I think that those who are responsible for private utilities do have a sense of responsibility, in my experience. But I did note with interest when the major power utility here said that they were ready for the last event. As I was watching on my phone, the report where they were saying that they were already, all systems go, set for the last event, that I was at that time passing by a pole that had been felled in my constituency in the last severe weather. It was not fully down, but it had been leaning. Then after the last severe weather, it was leaning a bit more. And obviously, we had made several attempts to have it addressed. The point I'm making, this is not just a plug for the pole in Grosvenor Road to be fixed. But what I am saying is that we have to make sure that being prepared for an event means that all of the liabilities that exist as a disaster is approaching or can potentially occur, that those are also addressed. I say all that to say, sir, that we have several issues that have to be fixed at once. And I think this government appreciates that. But the implementation part of this policy means that we have to do the fine work of ensuring that that these resources that are available to us, whether they are triggered before the disaster, as the Honourable Member suggested, or after, that this business of building in resilience meets people exactly where they are. So that those homes that are already standing, that are already insecure, that we understand that part of the investment to be made is to make sure that the people who own those homes, first of all, can prove that they own them. Another part of the investment that has to be made is to make sure that the people who own those homes can access resources to be able to fix them as they are deteriorating. I am sure, I don't know if government has already done a housing audit or whether that was done as part of the census, to be able to understand what is really the level of, what is the status of every home in Barbados, especially those ones that are made of timber. There are also homes or dwellings or places where people live that are perhaps not even registered officially as houses, but that house individuals, and that these also need to be factored in. I await with bated breath the census data to be able to see what that housing picture is. Because alongside this natural disaster and pandemic deferment of payment bill, these are the kinds of things that must also be instituted in order to make sure that when we talk about a resilient Barbados, we know what that looks like. We know what that means for how many houses need to be repaired in a given financial year, how many need to be built in a given financial year, how many people need a more predictable water supply, need more predictable sanitation. These are the kinds of things that I am assuming that this $5 billion US by 2033, I think that was what was quoted, that is a climate action plan that I am also assuming is now the manifestation of Roofs to Reefs made real, that we understand what those metrics look like. And I'll close by telling you why. I spoke a couple nights ago in a different place during a lecture about this idea of co-creating development. Co-creating development. And all it means is that there are things that the state contributes to people, and that there are things that people contribute to be able to make sure the state is not the government, to be able to make sure that the state can continue to provide the services that are needed for people to live well and to make the choices that they value. it means that we have several responsibilities, that we all have to play a part in ensuring that this vision that we have for a climate resilient Barbados, that this becomes real in all of our lives. And so I support this bill. I only leave us all with the reminder that when it comes to real resilience for Barbados and for Barbadians, that policy is implementation, and implementation is policy. With those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Leader Government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the postponement of the aforementioned bill.
Questions that this bill be postponed for further consideration. All of our members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This bill is postponed for further consideration. Honourable Leader Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the adjournment of the House until November 7th at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honourable chamber be adjourned until the 7th day of November at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those our members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honourable chamber stands adjourned until the 7th day of November, 2023 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.